Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Dear Katie podcast. This is Claire Kaplan. And normally you are welcomed by Katie Kessner, but we're going to start changing things up a little bit. And so today I'm lucky enough to co-host with Luiza Leite, who will be joining us for our podcast from time to time. Maybe, Luiza, you'd like to introduce yourself a little bit?
Yes, my name is Leite. I've been with the Take Back Foundation for years now and also been producing the podcast. I'm here to sit with you, think with you, and hear truths and journey of fellow survivors. It's an honor to be here alongside you, Claire.
Thanks, Luiza. So today we are lucky enough to be joined by Christy, who is going to introduce herself first briefly, and then we'll talk about Christy's story. So Christy, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, thanks for having me on today. So I was born in Ohio, grew up there with my parents and a younger brother, and then we ended up moving to Colorado when I was 9 years old. So I've spent most of my time out here in Colorado, still live in the Denver metro area. I attended school for anthropology and ended up graduating with both a bachelor's and master's degree in anthropology with an emphasis in archaeology. Ended up having 2 children during graduate school, and that shifted my career path a little bit. So I stayed home with them when they were young. And then when I went back into the workforce, I changed things up a little bit. I currently work for a library district as a cataloging associate, and I'm also in seminary right now to become an ordained priest.
Very interesting. Christy, well, I'm sure we're going to be discussing more about that during the course of this conversation. But tell us what brings you to the podcast today.
I wanted to be able to share my story as I've been in my healing journey. I haven't heard a whole lot about some of the specifics of my situation and wanted to make sure that other people knew that they weren't alone in experiencing it. So when I was a junior in high school, I studied abroad in Peru. While I was there, I lived with a host family. My host family that I was assigned to had 3 sons. One was 19, one was my age, but he was studying abroad, so I did not see him that year. And then one was 4. So I ended up attending school during the day and helping out my parents' pharmacy after school, and also then helping out with my younger host brother. My older host brother and I were in charge of him quite a bit. I had been there for a couple of weeks when my older host brother took me up. We were doing some laundry together, and he was telling me some scary stories and saying that he was going to comfort me and take care of me. And I completely trusted him. He would ask me questions about myself. I felt comfortable sharing it. About a month or so after I had arrived, I was brushing my teeth after lunch one day when my host parents and my little brother were taking their siesta time. And he ended up locking the bathroom door and pinning me up against the wall and raped me for the first time. This continued the rest of the time that I stayed with my host family for the next 8 months or so, on and off. At one point during the summer after I graduated from school in December, because it's the Southern Hemisphere, so the seasons are opposite, I was assigned to a different host family for the summer in Lima. I didn't know the city at all, but thought it'd be a great chance to get to know another place. I had been staying in the mountains, so now I was going to stay in the city. We got back to the bus station, the exchange students and myself, because we had just gone on a trip, and the head of the exchange program said to wait for him there and he'd be back. And he never came back. And I had to find a place to stay for the next week until he told me where to go. It was during this time that I was on my own in the city when I realized that I was pregnant. And I was so terrified, so afraid, didn't know what to do, being 17 years old in a different country and having no support, no one to talk to about it.
Can I, Christy, interrupt you, but I want to stop for a moment and give our listeners a chance to sort of digest what you've described to them, because they're hearing this really scary story. I mean, I also was an exchange student in Peru, so I can connect with you in a sense in that way. Didn't have the same experience. I'm sorry to say that you had such an experience. So can I ask you a couple of questions and then we'll catch up to where you stopped at this moment? Okay. So the family you first stayed with, where were they located in the country? Were they in the city or you said you were in the mountains. So where were you located?
We were out in the mountains. So it was a 14-hour bus ride from Lima.
Okay. It's a long mountain change. I assume we're talking about the Andes. So is there a city nearby or?
It was in Ayacucho.
Ayacucho, which is in the southern part of the country.
Yes.
When you first were assaulted by your brother, and I'm using it in quotes because he was your exchange brother, I guess, I'm assuming you didn't say anything to anyone at the time.
I did not.
What was your feeling about what happened? I mean, did you realize something was wrong? What was your response to the first incident and then as it went on?
After the first time, I didn't know what that was. And I asked my host brother what had happened. And he just told me that wasn't sex. And I had no idea what he meant. So I was in shock for a couple of weeks afterwards and felt like a surreal experience. Like, did this happen? Did this not happen? And then when it continued happening, then I knew it had been happening and I dissociated any time that I knew it was happening. And then afterwards kind of just put it out of my mind for a little bit. And tried to focus on going to school and learning Spanish and being the student ambassador that I was.
When you say you dissociated, Christy, what was that? Can you describe that for us? When you were dissociating, you were feeling X, or did you leave your body? You know, for a lot of people, it takes different forms.
It felt like things weren't real. Encountering people, having conversations, even just walking around, a sense of derealization, depersonalization in a way, and having a split from my inner world of what was happening and then the outer world in terms of how I interacted with other people.
You mentioned that he was the oldest brother. You were 17. How old was he at the time?
He was 19.
Okay, so not a big difference, but still. Do you feel your parents were aware he was smart about it? He only approached you when they weren't home. Do you think he was hiding it from them? What was the family dynamic around that?
He was definitely hiding it from them. He had opportunities to have time alone, just the two of us, whether it was during siesta when my host parents would go take a nap, or they would work late until 10 or 11 o'clock at night, and he and I would bring our younger host brother, who was 4, back to the apartment and put him to bed, and then we had a few hours before his parents would come home.
You mentioned the first time that he was telling you scary stories. What kind of scary stories? Were they talking about ghost stories? Are we talking about these are the horrible criminals? I mean, what was he telling you to make you scared?
Those were ghost stories at the time of a ghost that lived in the building.
Okay. So, but that was enough, though, to make you feel unsure.
Yes, he continued that, and that he liked to show me scary movies, horror movies, which I did not like to watch. And then he would say that he would protect me from it. So it was also confusing to have someone who was assaulting me also saying that he was going to be protecting me.
I can imagine it'd be confusing. So while you were there, you were pretty isolated because when you're first an exchange student, if you don't know a lot of people around you, did you know Spanish fluently or were you still learning it?
I didn't know it fluently. I had taken a couple of years in middle school and high school, so I was still learning.
So it wasn't like you was fluent or you were feeling very comfortable. Once you started figuring things out, did you start thinking about, I'd like to talk to somebody about this, or did you keep it all to yourself?
I kept it all to myself. The safeguards that the exchange program had put in place in terms of who to talk to about a situation like this were not available to me.
Why were those resources not available?
The exchange program had assigned a counselor for me, and also the president of the exchange program in Peru was supposed to be the next person I would tell. The counselor I was assigned to was jealous of my host family and spread rumors about me and them before I had even talked to her about anything. And the president of the exchange program was involved in some not so good dealings. So he was stealing money from exchange students. He was abandoning us in places, not taking care of us.
So this is the guy who abandoned you in Lima?
Yes.
I imagine you don't want to mention the name of the exchange program, or do you feel comfortable letting people?
I do not know.
Okay. Did you consider reaching out to your family at home?
I thought about reaching out to a couple of friends at home. It would have been challenging because I would have needed to get one of the pay cards and go to a payphone or go to the internet cafe and pay to use the internet. This was back in 2000, so we didn't have cell phones. And I also didn't want anyone, if I had called someone from the home phone, to overhear what was happening, especially my host brother, because I was afraid of what he would do if I told anybody.
Of course. I think a lot of folks now don't realize how one can be isolated when you're an exchange student or living in a foreign country, especially when you're young and you don't know what the resources, like you said, aren't available to you, how isolating that can be.
Yes, I also was the only exchange student in Ayacucho. The other exchange students that were in Peru that year were in other cities and they got together regularly, but that was not an option for me.
Okay.
Did you make friends that you were close to there? I know that I moved into the US when I was 20 and I had a really hard time making friends, and it felt isolating even with the internet. So I can't even imagine going through something like that and not having people close to you.
Yeah, I did make friends at school. I didn't feel comfortable telling them anything because they knew my host family really well.
Yeah, it was a small town that everyone knew each other situation.
Yes, pretty much, especially since one of my host brothers, the one I didn't meet, I think either in my class or maybe the class above me, but right around my age. So they knew him and knew the family that way.
Right. That makes everything even more difficult. How long were you in Arequipa?
In Ayacucho, I ended up being there for about 10 months, but on and off. As an exchange student, we would travel around Peru, or one time we traveled around South America. So I was in and out.
How long were you supposed to be in Lima? You went to stay with a different family, or you were just, how did you end up not having a place to go to when you got to Lima?
Yeah, for the summer, we were supposed to be staying in a different city with a different host family that the president assigned to us. And he never told me who my family was. And so we had gotten back from a trip, all of the exchange students, and I didn't have anywhere to go because he hadn't told me yet. So he said he'd make a few phone calls.
And what about the other kids? Were they assigned to other families or?
Yes, they all had other families to go to or had other cities they knew that they were going to go to after Lima.
So none of your exchange student friends, you weren't able to reach out to them, I assume, because you had no way to reach them?
I did for the first night that I stayed in Lima. I ended up staying with a group of them who were going to go to the airport the next morning to fly out. So I was able to stay there for one night. And then I had to figure out what to do for the rest of the week while I was waiting to hear where to go.
And I'm curious because I'm thinking about how vulnerable you were. I mean, that just sort of boggles my mind. Thinking, how could he just abandon you like that and without even arranging for a hotel or something for you? I mean, you were a kid. Did you tell your parents later what happened?
I told them in the process of being abandoned what happened. I didn't tell them about any of the abuse. But yes, I did eventually end up getting my own hotel room. Yeah.
So you ended up being assigned to a family, or, I mean, you said it was a week before you had a place to go.
Yes, I did eventually figure out which family to go to. I think I had gone to the president's hotel a few times to see if he was there, and eventually was able to be there at a time he was there, and he gave me the name and number of where to go.
Well, I'm glad in the end you found a place to go, but this whole situation seems so irresponsible. And here you are, a kid. Had you traveled abroad before?
No, this was my first experience.
This is not the same as, say, going with friends with a backpack to Europe and taking, Eurail around the country. So did your parents ever find out about the assaults that you experienced while you were there?
I did tell them a few years later.
Did you end up finding anyone that you could speak to about this in Peru? I know you probably spoke to people afterward. We could talk about that in a minute. But is there anyone you shared this about the assaults while you were there, or?
No, I didn't tell anyone while I was there.
And you said you realized you had gotten pregnant. So what happened with that? Can you tell us that?
Yeah, I realized that when I was on my own in Lima. And like I said, I was terrified and I was afraid. And at the same time, I had this sense of feeling protective and love and care. And I thought that, okay, I couldn't defend myself, but I could defend this child. And so it felt empowering for a while as well. Until a few weeks later when I had a miscarriage, and the physical and emotional pain was so intense from that experience. And again, no one knew. So no one understood what was happening and my reactions to it.
Oh my gosh, Christy, it's like one thing on top of another. So when you had this miscarriage, were you alone in your room or did you end up in the hospital? Did you get medical attention? What happened?
I did not get any medical attention. I didn't know where to go. I was still in Lima and staying with this temporary host family, which was a brother and a sister who were in their early 20s, late teens. So there wasn't like a parental figure for me to talk to about it either. And so I spent a lot of time in my room, just keeping to myself.
It's very impressive what you were able to go through on your own, and also how beautiful it was to hear you talk about the hope that you had when you were pregnant and how disheartening it must have been to lose that baby. I can't even imagine. Can you talk about how you got through it and how was the rest of your time in Peru?
It really felt like losing a part of myself that I was trying to find again. I think it was a couple weeks afterwards we went on our South America trip, so that was a good distraction from it, being around other exchange students and seeing several other countries. And then when we got back from that, I went back to my original host family in Ayacucho, and the abuse started up again. I just had a sense of surrender. I ended up fighting it less, and I knew that whenever I fought, it made the abuse worse. But I also lost kind of that sense of strength and just allowed for more of it to happen until it started happening every day after a couple months of being back there. And I found an excuse to come home early. I was still supposed to be there for another couple of months, and I could no longer pretend that things were okay and needed to find a way to come back to Colorado as soon as possible. So I said I wanted to come back to attend the graduation of the class above me in Colorado, and therefore I could leave at the very end of May within a week of asking to leave. So it was also a very abrupt leaving time.
What happened when, after you got home and you were getting back into Colorado life and graduating, etc.? What happened for you after that? What was your process of dealing with this trauma that you had?
At first, I couldn't deal with it because I had become fluent in Spanish, and because of the trauma, I couldn't remember English. It took me several months to relearn it, and then I needed to focus on my senior year in high school. I was very depressed and just kept thinking about wanting to have my baby and not wanting to go to school. I had a very hard time just making it through the day. And I knew that I needed to. It was expected of me to graduate high school and go to college. So I did my best to use any determination that I could summon to just keep moving forward one day at a time.
This sort of amnesia that you had around language, did you get counseling, or was that something that happened later, or did it happen at all for you? And I'm wondering about the amnesia piece of that, and if people were wondering why you were having trouble remembering English.
They were wondering why I had trouble remembering English, and my family didn't know Spanish to be able to communicate with me. I didn't get counseling until I was an adult.
Okay.
Oh, it's always so surprising for me to hear when kids, because you were 17, I don't know if you had turned 18 by then, to hear how much kids go through and parents don't notice and the school doesn't notice because you're unable to speak English and still no one asked why.
So it wasn't until several years later when I did tell my parents that they were making the connections to my experience afterwards when I came back from Peru, a completely different person and the difficulties I had. Then it made more sense to them. But no one asked me at the time.
I wonder how they felt about feeling guilty about not asking more questions, or trying to find out what was going on with you.
Yeah, I'm sure they did, because by the time I told them, it was because my symptoms were so severe and I wanted to get help for them.
And what were those symptoms? Because I assume by this point, you were regained your English. Are you comfortable telling us what those symptoms were?
Yeah, I was struggling with PTSD, depression, anxiety, self-harm, suicidal ideation, and needed to get help after struggling with that for 3 or 4 years.
And all these are such common experiences that people have after this kind of trauma. And it's not only that you were raped multiple times, but it was in a place where you were so isolated, had nowhere to turn, no one to support you, no parental figure to talk to. You were isolated under the best of circumstances, and this was the worst of circumstances.
Yes, and that sense of feeling trapped too, not knowing what to do.
Did the symptoms started as soon as you got back? Was there a period when you just tried to not think about it and then it came back at once? How did that happen for you, developing all those issues you described for us?
When I came back, I was depressed, and the only thing I could remember about my time away was being pregnant and miscarrying. It took another year for me to remember the assaults, and they came back in the form of flashbacks.
I do have a question because I've heard some similar stories from survivors where their response to the assaults or the abuse that they experienced, all different kinds, came sort of out of the blue, that they were not super, I would say, sort of naive, not super aware about what sexual violence was or not a whole lot about sex, and actually may have had a very kind of rosy worldview. Let me put it that way. And that this sort of experience was such a shock to their system. Then they would have very severe emotional and psychological responses to it. And I was wondering, can you recall who Christy was before she went to Peru? What was she like?
It's really hard to remember that, but I had a sense of that rosy-colored worldview. I didn't have any interest in sex. I didn't know anything about it, which is why when I was assaulted, I had no idea what had happened. And I didn't know anything about consensual versus non-consensual at the time. So when I was in college, I did a lot of research on it. That's how I learned, at least intellectually, a lot of what was happening. And then I needed to go into counseling to help with the emotional parts of it.
That makes a lot of sense, actually, because I think intellectually it's sometimes the gateway. It's easier to think about these issues when they're sort of at arm's length, when we intellectualize things, but then really addressing the internal emotional impact can be a whole different thing, a whole different process. But it's great that you were able to do that. You figured that out and you were able to start addressing that. What would you like to tell our listeners today about your experience? What would you like the most important things for them to know?
One of the most important things that I wanted to say was that it was okay to hold these even seemingly contradictory emotions at the same time of our experiences and our reactions to them and in the healing process. So for me to be so afraid when I found out I was pregnant and also to experience such positive emotions, such love and care at the same time has been important for me to be able to hold and experiencing them all together, as opposed to trying to separate them from, one from the other.
And you're right.
And to also share how important it was for me to reach out and get support, even though it was delayed. Being able to share my story and have someone witness it, even though they weren't there in the moment, someone who was empathetic and caring and validated my experience, has been tremendously helpful, both in individual therapy as well as in group therapy.
Thank you, Christy. That's really helpful.
That's great to hear. You said that counseling really helped you. Was that any other part to your healing journey outside of therapy, some kind of work that you had to do by yourself, something else that you want to share with us?
For me, it was really helpful to get into running and yoga. Those both helped with my anxiety and depression symptoms and helped me to reconnect to my body and have it be a safe place again, and helped me to be able to experience and then share my emotions as well, because I had gone numb for several years after college, and it was a way to help me get back into figuring out who I was and reconnecting with myself.
I have one more question, and maybe we can wind it up. And that is, did you ever or have you ever considered contacting that exchange program to give them feedback about your experience?
I did a few years ago. I reported what had happened and gave them feedback because I did not want this to happen to anybody else, both on the preventive side and on the support side if something did happen. And they responded saying that they've put more measures in place in the last 20 years, and also asked if I had wanted to report the specific family and person and follow through with that investigation. I declined at that time, but I wanted to make sure that they knew that this had happened to help others so that they would know, okay, we also need to put some more supports in place. It's not just having supports in that home country, in that exchange country. We also need to have the supports in place in your home country, especially if you're not fluent in the language. How are you going to be able to share what happened?
Well, I'm glad to hear that
I think it's so important that you contacted them even though you decided not to go any further with the family or with the individual, but so they know that this happened under their watch and they need to do better. So thank you for doing that for other people that are going to use the same program to go places. I hope now that these new measures are effective because they don't deserve to go what you've been through.
Yes, thank you. I really wanted to support all of our exchange students because there's also many benefits we can get from studying abroad.
That's right. I should add that this is not just an issue for high school exchange programs. This is an issue that college students face when they do study abroad programs. So they're not necessarily staying with a host family. They may be staying on a college campus in another country, and they can experience sexual violence also. And they don't all have the same kinds of services on the college campuses, or the laws of those countries are different. And they may also be very isolated or unsure about what they can do if something were to happen. So it's really important that we have further conversations about this issue.
Yes, I agree.
So thank you, Christy, so much for sharing your story with us and for raising awareness about the potential difficulties that students can experience when they're traveling abroad and in the homes, or they think they're going to be in a safe environment because they're living with a family.
Yes, thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you again.
Thank you, Christy. It was an honor to have you on the show.
We so appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you and take care.
You too.